Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. So it's the first Friday of 2020. Happy New Year, everyone. And so I thought I would talk about my 2020 reading goals. So it's only appropriate that when talking about goals, you kind of reflect on how the previous year went because, at least for me, my goals for the upcoming year are always influenced by how the previous year went. So last year was, a different year for me in terms of like reading and booktube. For those of you guys who have been around for the past year, you noticed last year I decided I wanted to do quarterly goals because I realized that whenever I would make goals at the beginning of the year, by like the halfway point, I wouldn't care about those goals anymore. And so I figured quarterly goals would be really great because then I can kind of assess how I'm doing with the goals that I had set for myself and then make any adjustments or changes or abandon any of the goals, start different goals, things like that. And so I really like that as a concept, but last year was a very transitional year, I suppose you could say. Like I started a new job and a bunch of stuff in my life changed. And so my reading changed quite a bit. And so I did my first quarter check-in, and after that I did a hiatus for the second quarter. And then I came back for the third and fourth quarter of the year, but I was like so exhausted that I was basically like, I didn't say this like verbally, but basically what happened was I was like, I'm just gonna read whatever keeps my interest and make videos whenever I can. And I think that's just what I needed to do last year. Like I just needed to not make very strict restrictions, I suppose, or like boundaries or rules or anything like that for myself last year because I just needed to find my equilibrium again with life and booktube and reading and all of that stuff. And I think that I might have it now. Of course, it's still, pretty early in the year, but even just the way I've prioritized things towards the end of last year and stuff like that, I am creating more space for other things. And I think I will have the space again to handle sort of like goals and things like that again. So I am going to do a quarterly check-in and then I will do assessments and maybe change my goals, but I don't really have that many goals. So I don't know. We'll see what's going to happen. I'll get into it now about like what I actually have planned for 2020. So like I said, 2019's reading was a little bit different from a lot of the previous years before that. I read less, which I was fine with, but I also just kind of picked up whatever caught my interest. And when I was looking back on my reading for 2019, I realized that there were two things really missing from my reading last year. One of them was comics and one of them was nonfiction. So those are kind of the two categories of things that I want to focus on in 2020 to get back into the habit of picking up those books because I do enjoy both comics and nonfiction. I just neglected them quite a bit last year. So I'm going to start with the nonfiction. So in 2019, I read about 77 books, and out of those 77, 9 were nonfiction. Originally, I went through and I just counted how many nonfiction I read, and last year was 9. The previous year, I read 20, and the year before that, I read 16. So 9 is a drop. But I also knew that I had read significantly less, so I decided to like run percentages to see how different they were, and I still read less last year. So in 2019, I read around 12% nonfiction. In 2018, I had gotten a little over 16%, and in 2017, I'd hit right around 16%. So my goal for 2020 was going to be to read 12 nonfiction books as a minimum. So one a month seems very doable. And if I keep to around 75 to 77 books read this year, that would get me to 16%. And then my stretch goal was to try to hit 20% nonfiction. I've never been able, I don't think, to hit 20% nonfiction. I have to look at my old spreadsheets to see how the numbers came out, but I've always had a hard time kind of hitting that 20% mark. Like 15-ish percent is like where I'm the most comfortable, like 10 to 15%. 20% is kind of a stretch goal, but then I was like, I don't know if I can actually do it. If I read 75 books, that means I have to read 15 nonfiction books. It's not impossible, but I just don't know if I want to like push myself that hard. But then I remembered that I am helping with the BookTube prize this year. And by remembered, I mean I got an email about it this morning. So I signed up to help for the BookTube prize, and I only signed up for the first session, I believe, or like the first round of judging because I didn't know how I was going to do with the BookTube prize. I didn't participate in it last year. I kind of wanted to participate in it, but I also know that I don't like overly strict reading like guidelines or anything like that. Like, so there are reasons why I usually don't participate in a lot of like read-alongs or book clubs or anything like that. It's because like when I'm told to read a book, a lot of times my brain just like immediately rebels and wants to read anything else. So we're going to see how Book 2 prize works out. But I signed up for both fiction and nonfiction. I don't even remember doing this. I mean, I remember signing up for it, but I didn't realize I signed up for both fiction and nonfiction. So I'm going to be doing both. And so my round is going to be at the beginning of the year. I don't know how many books are going to be given to each judge. So that's going to obviously impact how much I read. But on the plus side of that, that means I'm going to be reading a significant amount of nonfiction towards the beginning of the year. So maybe 15 isn't that much of a stretch, or maybe 20% won't be that much of a stretch, because if I have to read, you know, 6 nonfiction books in the beginning of the year, that's already going to give me a significant head start. But in general, I just need to read, or not need to, I want to read more nonfiction in 2020. All right, and then the second goal is to read more comics. And so I went and I looked, and last year I only read like 3 comic books, and it's because I did the Read More Comics readathon. During the readathon, I read 2, and then I read another one right after that. And other than that, I didn't read any comics or graphic novels or anything along those lines last year, which is a travesty. The reason why I even thought of doing this is because I was on Twitter, as I often am, and AV Club put out their best 25 best comics that came out in the last decade list. And so I was looking at that list, and I was like, went into it being ready to be super skeptical, because I just assumed it would be a bunch of comics that I wouldn't be interested in, or would be like super common, that I would have read all the ones that I was interested in. But it turns out of those 25, I had only read 2 of them, but the rest of them were a lot of comics that I wanted to read. And so I decided that that would actually be a really great list to work my way through this year. So I think what I want to do is to try to read, if I do this for the whole year, to try to read the other 23 comics. But if I don't do it for the entire year, just to get through as much of it as I can. And so that comes out to about 2 comics a month, which seems very reasonable. The 2 comics that are on the list that I've already read are the Matt Fraction Hawkeye run and the March graphic novel series. And so I obviously won't be like reading those again. And so I might sub in other comics, but we'll just see how the year goes. But the other thing I want to do is that it does have at least one comic book series on there that I had started but not finished, and so that's Giant Days, and I really enjoyed Giant Days. And so when I get to that one, I think what I'm going to do is like get the bind-ups that I haven't read yet and do basically like a catch-up for the series. So yeah, I'm really excited about this one. The first one on the list is Check Please, and I've heard nothing but amazing things about this comic book series. So like, as you can see, I already got it from the library, and I'll probably be getting most of these from the library, and then from there, if I really enjoy them, I'll buy them from the comic book store. I'll have a link down below to the list if you want to see it for yourself, but I honestly think it's a really great list in terms of like the variety and the types of comics that they cover. Whether or not it's like the best of the decade, I don't know if I would say. Like, there are some really big name comics that are not included, such as Saga, but at the same time, I think that they cover a wide variety of comics in that list in a really great way, that I think it's a really good either starter or just general guide to reading comic books. And hopefully like reading all of these will also just get me back into the swing of picking up comics again. What I really need is like a way to input some good comic book coverage and commentary and things like that. So if you know of any booktubers who read a decent amount of comic, or like even in general websites and stuff like that, like Bookright has like a comics side of things, but other than that, like I don't really hear about a lot of comic stuff anymore. So yeah, any sort of recommendations you have on that end, I would love to have. So yeah, those are basically my only goals that I have right now for my 2020 reading. I never really set a book goal, or in terms of like number of books to read in a year, just because I feel like in general my reading pace has just been what it is. And as long as I've always put 50 books as my Goodreads challenge goal, just because I use that as like a pace marker. And if I don't hit 50 books, it's fine. It like nothing bad is going to happen. But I just kind of use that as a like pace setter for the year, and it kind of gives me an eye of like, how am I doing compared to previous years? And then in terms of other percentages, like I feel like I've been reading a decent amount of, authors of color. I read vast majority of the books that I read are women, or by authors who are identify as women. I didn't keep a spreadsheet or anything like that last year, so there are a couple of areas where I'm not really sure how I'm doing it. So things like books in translation, and like if you watch my 10-year tag video, I mentioned wanting to read more books that featured disabled characters or written by disabled authors and things like that. And so that's a thing I have on like my radar as something to keep in mind, but I haven't quite figured out the best ways to get recommendations about or from those like specific areas. So that's like a thing I'm kind of working on. So I'm not going to make it a specific goal just yet because I don't know like what's realistic or feasible or anything along those lines. And I think like for me personally, having less goals that I can really focus on and really do well work better for me over the long run, because then I can get into that habit and then I can build like a new habit in 2021 and so on. So yeah, these are the two things I'm going to focus on. Hopefully I'll do quarterly check-ins and just to see how I'm doing, but also hopefully you'll just see in general, if you follow me on like Instagram or anything like that, you'll see whether or not I'm actually following through with any of these. So yeah, let me know down in the comments below what your 2020 reading goals are, whether you have a million or just one or none. I would love to hear about them. Or if you are interested in like, participating in reading these comic books with me or anything along those lines, definitely let me know down in the comments below. I would love to have people to talk about this stuff with. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.